السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم ألهمنا مراشد أمورنا وأعذنا من شرور أنفسنا. Allah Tabarak Ta'ala has structured our deen such how on a dastarkhan, a person who understands how to prepare a meal, and how when we eat, then something will first be brought which is called the sweet. Thereafter the meal will come, then there will be fruits, then there might be a dessert, there will be a drink, there might be tea. And if any one of those things are left out, then the woman of the house will say, like, the meal is not yet full. It's not complete. Whereas for a normal meal, even if a person has even one of those things, it's more than enough. But it became known that a complete dastarkhan requires it all. That is why once upon a time, one man went to someone's house. So they gave him everything, but they never gave him tea. And because he had the desire for tea, now he never know how to ask for tea. So the easiest what he thought about, he said, there's one dua to read. So the dua normally is that aftara indakum as-sa'imun, may the pious, aftara indakum as-sa'imun, akala ta'amakum al-abrar, may the pious always eat your food, and may the fasting person always break his fast by you. And the last part was sallat alaykum al-malaika, and may the angels always be making dua for you. So there he said, except Jibreel. So the man of the house said, like, what do you mean except Jibreel? What about Jibreel? Why he mustn't make dua? He said, no, after the tea comes in, he must make dua for you also. But until the tea, my dua can't be fulfilled. Man always had the hope, I need to get it all. But when it came for deen, many a time we felt that that part is not for me. More than what I got is sufficient. So one of those things that slowly got cut away from our deen was this amal of i'tikaf. When we were small, we understood i'tikaf. We learnt in madrasa, they call it sunnate muakkada al-kifaya. It meant that if one or two uncles in the town sits in the masjid, then the sunnah is ada. So we even used to hear about certain masjids couldn't find anyone for i'tikaf. So they would pay someone from another town that, uncle, you come make i'tikaf here. It was known the old man makes i'tikaf, the man whose wife passed away makes i'tikaf, the man who got no job, he makes i'tikaf. And we grew up thinking that the amal of i'tikaf was just the haqq of the masjid must get fulfilled. So as long as one person comes in the masjid, the work is done. Thereafter, later on, when we saw what this i'tikaf was, a car normally once a year most, if you don't do a service in the car, the next year the car is going to start giving trouble. It needs always to have a service done. During those days of service, even if you have to be without your car, you will have to make that sabr and say that if I say I can't separate from my car, then the car next year is not going to be on the road. This body of man also needed service. And Almighty Allah created times where the service of it was going to be done in a unique manner. 11 months of the year, nafal was prescribed, fast nafal. Spend your some time in khalwat. Think of Almighty Allah. Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam's nature was, before becoming the Nabi of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, Hubbiba ilayya al-khala. To stay alone, to stay away from the world, to come out of his house, to leave his beloved wife, to take a packet of food, and to go in the cave of Hira. He wasn't doing one i'tikaf. He wasn't doing a 3-day i'tikaf. He used to stay there for a week, sometimes 2 weeks. Sometimes Khadija radiallahu anha would bring more food. She would also climb up. She would meet him in the cave. They would spend time. She would leave the parcel. She would go back. He would remain. If you have to understand where Hira is from Makkah Mukarramah, alone he used to sit in that cave. If we ever go to visit it, we go in the day. The taxi is with us. Sometimes the man says, you want to do a climb. You say, how long it takes? You say, it might take about 2.5, 3 hours. A whole group will climb it. We'll enter the cave. We'll sit there for a while. And then after, quickly we'll say, right, let's go back now. Tell someone, tonight you don't want to stay here. Who's going to stay in that cave? Allah's Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam sat in that cave. Days and days alone he would sit. From where he was, he would look at Makkah Mukarramah. And then he would contemplate. He would think about how far man has gone into darkness. How away they have gone. At the time he was looking that if Allah, my Creator, can inspire me, that what my people are doing, everything is wrong. And it was on that khalwat, being alone, that inspiration was going to start. Now he was going to start having true dreams. What he would see in the dream, the next morning he would see it when awake. He was now being prepared to be the Nabi of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. After Nubuwwah started, this amal of the ummah staying somewhere away from the house became part of our deen. But over the years it became forgotten. To come out of the house and to be able to stay in the masjid, to seclude a person, one, the demand could have been, ulama have written, Allah could have asked that I want you few days in the year that you must go out into the wilderness and just sit under the trees. And there are people in the world, they do that. They say to get away from this fast life, there are sometimes I really need to go out. So they go camping. They put up a tent. That man is a billionaire, but now he's sitting in a small tent. He got his fishing rod. One mosquito is biting him. You'll tell him you left your mansion for this year. You're living on beans, canned fish. But he says, I love this life. He says, I just want to run away from the problems of the city life. For the people of this ummah, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam never want us to go to the waters and put up a fishing tent. Because the most that will happen there, you'll get bit by the mosquito. But you're not going to find Allah there. For the people of this ummah, he wanted the tent to come up in the masjid. A great tabi'i of his era, this is a very unique sentence, he said, Zuhri rahimullah. He said, how astonishing it is that people no longer perform i'tikaf. Whereas there are many actions which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sometimes did and sometimes did not do. He left it out sometimes. He said, but he did not miss i'tikaf from the time he came to Medina Munawwara until the end of his life. And if ever there was a time where in the last 10 days of Ramadan he could not keep, then he would make a qadha of that day. One time he kept it in the first 10 days of Shawwal. He made sure that whenever he could, he would get that at least 10. There was sometimes his i'tikaf was the entire month of Ramadan. He was in the first 10 days. He was in the second 10. After the second 10, he came out of his tent. He said, I came in i'tikaf in searching of Laylatul Qadr. I did not find it in the first 10. I looked for it in the second. He said, Jibreel alayhi salam has told to me that find it in the last 10. He said, whoever is making i'tikaf with me, remain in the masjid. We only got 10 days left. This i'tikaf that he wanted his ummah to come onto it. And he always, like how for Surah Kahf, which was so vital for the iman of people, especially in the time of trials like what we are living in today. He asked, read the whole surah, and even if Dajjal comes in front of you, he will not be able to harm you. We're living in a time where Surah Kahf is vital. He also knew that some people in the ummah will not manage the whole Surah Kahf. So he said, and if you can't get the whole surah, read 10 verses of the surah. Sometimes he said, who will memorize 10 verses? Sometimes he said, who will just recite 10 verses? Allah will make the trials of Dajjal easy for him, as Allah made the fire cool for Ibrahim alayhi salam. So much he emphasized, but how kind he was, that if you can't get the whole, don't miss out completely. If you can't read the whole surah, read some part of the surah. If you can't make the whole i'tikaf, make some i'tikaf. If 10 days are too much, to understand that this 10 days was vital for the protection of my iman. But if I can't get 10 days, when Hazrat Moulana Muhammad Ilyas Rahimullah was inspired for the work of Tabligh, one of the main parts of his amal was for the islah of the general masses. Their islah, their reformation cannot take place in their own house. They have to be pulled out of the house and brought to the masjid. When a person is very sick, they say, bring him to hospital. If he is not well at all in hospital, they said, ICU. We are going to put him in the high care ward. Everyone understands that there are different environments for different purposes. When it came for reformation of character, reformation of heart, reformation of mind, a man said, my tongue is very, very rude. He said, my eye is very, very loose. I want to always protect my eye. I look down, immediately I look up again. I have been told you cannot look at certain things. He said, I can't control my eye. He said, has your car ever gone for a service? Yes. Has your body ever gone for a service? The body has not done a service from the time perhaps we became baligh. That is why this leg where it's supposed to walk, a lot of times out of Ramadhaan, it doesn't walk in that direction. It's supposed to walk towards the masjid. It starts walking towards the market. It's supposed to walk towards Allah's pleasure. It starts walking towards the devil. The eye is supposed to remain focused on halal. It's only looking at haram. The tongue is supposed to only get enjoyment in halal. It says, I only like that which tastes. You say, even if it's haram, you say, even if it's haram, I search for taste. No longer I search for purity. When everything is gone out, and then still the person says, but I don't need a service. Then what's left after that there is the car as it gets stuck one day on the highway, and someone has to tow it back in disgrace. There are some times where our bodies are now going to get stuck. That we're just not moving forward. Perhaps one reason is this i'tikaf that comes once a year. A great wali of his time, he was the king of the era, Balkh. The king of Balkh, Allah Tabarak Ta'ala wants to change his life. Allah Tabarak Ta'ala sends an angel. In the form of a man, the angel starts walking on the top. Their roofs was such that you could sleep on the roof also. And people would sleep. And you could walk on the roofs. Because it was flat. He hears someone walking on his, but because he is the Sultan of Balkh, he wonders, how was someone allowed on my roof? Did the guard not stop him? It is for us to go on the roof. So he goes up and he sees this man walking with his stick like a shepherd. And he says to the man, how dare you come onto the royal palace? Who gave you permission? So the shepherd says, I come without permission. He can't understand that. What do you mean you out without permission? How you got here? Did the guard not stop you? So in anger he says to that person, what you want here? And the shepherd says, I'm looking for my sheep. So he looks around and he says, where do you think you'll find sheep? On the roof of the Sultan. Sheep is found in the fields. Why you came here to look for your sheep? And the shepherd looks in his eye. This is the eye of an angel. It looks in his eye and penetrates his heart. And he says, if I cannot expect to find my sheep on the roof of the Sultan, how do you expect to find Allah on the bed of the Sultan? He said, if I can't find my sheep here, you want to find your Allah there. You're surrounded by luxury and you lift up your hands and say, Allah, make me yours. He said, surrounded by luxury. He said, if you want me to look for my sheep in the right place, I have come to tell you, look for your Allah in the right place also. Moulana Muhammad Ilyas Rahimullah's work of Tabligh became so unique because he was able to pull people out of their houses and bring them to the masjid. The work got done in the masjid. In the environment of the angels, the person now becomes the guest and Allah is the host. One narration is, it is the right of every guest that the host must do for him what the guest wants. It's not like that. When a guest comes to your house, you ask him, what will you have? You don't say, you eat what I eat. You say, will you have green tea? Will you have Indian tea? Will you have Eastern tea, Western tea? What tea you want? You say, I'll bring coffee for you. I'll bring Milo for you. Hot chocolate for you, my guest. He said, it's the normal habit that a host, whatever he wants, whatever the guest wants, the host says. Almighty Allah announced, then I also will behave with my guest in the same manner. When the world will be asked, who's asking? But the man from the masjid who's asking, his dua hits by the arsh, the throne of Allah, in a manner no one's dua hits. When you will find the last 10 nights of Ramadan, when the whole world was told, go in search of the night of power, this is the time to find Allah. At the same time, Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, I went searching for Laylatul Qadr, but where he went searching? The house of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam itself is a garden of Jannah. Itself, where he walked between his house and his mimbar became Rawdatum min Riyadil Jannah. It became a garden of Jannah because he walked up and down, up and down. Everything fell on him. Divine tajalli, mercy fell. He walked between this place. This became the garden. His place of tahajjud was always the house of Aisha radiallahu anha, or the house he spent the night in. He would wake up at night. He would not go in the masjid. The Nabi of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, wherever he was, Allah was there. His tahajjud would take place in the house. He would say to Aisha radiallahu anha, when going into sajda, he would touch her leg, pull your leg up. So now he would go in the sajda. He would read his salah of the night in the house. He could have found Almighty Allah. He could have found the night of Laylatul Qadr in the house. But he said, in search of Laylatul Qadr, I came to the masjid. He created a sunnah for his ummah, that when you will search for Laylatul Qadr, don't do it at home. Also come to the masjid. He said, the first 10 nights I never found it. I looked. I searching the next, I stayed in the masjid again. His tent would be put up. Sahaba radiallahu anhum would come to the masjid. Me and you today have to think of the sunnah. It was a sunnah that he opened up for the world, so that me and you could also connect with Almighty Allah. People who went 3 days in Jamaat, 3 days their entire life changed. 3 days. I met a person who came from the Arab lands. He said, I used to work in the haram. Look at his sentence. He said, I used to work in the haram. He said, at that time I never really have any interest in tabligh. For me everything was bid'ah, Arab. He said, I used to see these brothers, and I used to always be upset what they're wasting their time here. This is the land of the haram. He said, I was a person in the haram who would tell people bid'ah. But at night when I would go home, me and my wife would spend hours watching television. He said, we would tell them bid'ah there, and we knew what we was doing is haram here also. We used to watch whatever we used to watch, and an hour, 2 hours would go. People outside would think me, I'm the man of the haram. At home I knew I'm the man of the television. He said, one day a Jamaat somehow managed to make my wife's mind up. They couldn't get me, but the woman made her mind, and she said, we're going. She said, I told someone we will go out for 24 hours. I said to her, what? This bid'ah? She said, I don't find anything wrong in it. I'm going and you have to come with me. And he says, very reluctantly we went out for the 24 hours. He said, in that 24 hour, I said, what happened to me that night, I don't know. But the next day when I went to visit my wife, she said to me, last night I had a feeling which in my life I never felt. She said, I don't want the TV in the house anymore. She said, I don't want the TV in the house. He said to her, I'm also feeling that the TV maybe has to come out. He said, we came back home, and an action which we had never done in our life, taking out the TV one night in the house of Allah, inspired me to take out the television. He said, my whole life changed after that. He said, what was the cause of that change? He said, I used to work in the haram. He said, but I never entered the haram searching for Almighty Allah. He said, one night I spent in the house of Allah. It was not even in the haram. A person who will go to the house of Allah searching for Allah. Even one night in i'tikaf could change our entire life. When this last 10 nights are coming, I want every one of us to think, so many Ramadhans have passed. Have I ever made a full 10-day i'tikaf? So that must be our first vision. I want to one day make that 10. And make it where? I will make it in a masjid where programs do take place. I will ask an alim, I'm going to be sitting for i'tikaf. A few of us are sitting 10 days. We are not just going to sit, but we want a few programs around. So during the day, our reformation can take place with words. And during the night, our reformation can take place with reciting Quran to Allah. During the day, I want to hear something. During the night, I want to be reciting. I want a full program for 10 days. You must keep me company, and I must be given my chance to be alone. I must learn how to disconnect myself from the world. My phone will be left at home. I'll enter the masjid. When 10 days are very difficult, but we keep that, I need that. In Azadwal, in our madrasa, I remember the year when i'tikaf started. Hazrat Shaykhul Hadith, Moulana Zakaria Rahimullah, he would write to ulama. He would write to ulama that 11 months of the year has already passed. But those ulama were teaching for 11 months. They were not in business. He said 11 months of the year have passed, whilst all of us have become negligent of Almighty Allah. But they were all teaching. The people he would write to, some of them were teaching the biggest kitabs of hadith. He said, now the month of Ramadan is coming, let's not miss this opportunity to reconnect with our Allah. He said, come now to Saharanpur, come. And ulama from far and wide would go. And they would just sit by Hazrat Shaykh. There would hardly be programs. But to bring everyone back to the masjid in the month of Ramadan, Allah Tabarak Ta'ala inspired this masjid, all masajid. In Azadwal, when it started, I remember the first year, it was only 10 days i'tikaf, and there was about 40 brothers who responded to the call. The next year, it became a 30-day i'tikaf. Over the years, it now became a 40-day i'tikaf. And every year, there are people who are ready to take out 40 days from their busy schedule. Because after they found what they're getting in those days, it changed their entire thinking. It changed their course of life. It changed how they were running behind a world which you can never get. Now they are ready to tell their wives, you listen to the programs, you make i'tikaf at home. Woman must also make i'tikaf. The hadith comes that Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he put up the tent. Aisha radiallahu anha said, I also want to make i'tikaf. It is a little different to explain it now. But because her house was so close to the masjid, permission was granted. It will just be an extension of the house. Hafsa radiallahu anha saw, she put up a tent. Zainab radiallahu anha saw, she put up a tent. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, what is this tents? They said, your wives. He said, take it all out. He said, is this goodness? Because now the woman will start entering. He said, take it all out. That year he never sat for i'tikaf. So in Shawwal, 10 days he sat. He was not happy that, but he never wanted to hurt them also. So take it all out, take out my tent also. No one will sit for i'tikaf this year. But then the end of the narration comes, ثُمَّ اِعْتَكَفَ أَزْوَاجُهُ مِنْ بَعْدِ. After the demise of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not a year passed except that his wives made their i'tikaf in their homes. Every year they made sure they made the i'tikaf because they understood from him how important this i'tikaf was. If the husband says, I'm going to the masjid for i'tikaf, the wife got no worry then. She doesn't have to worry much. She'll put her milk one side, she'll put her cereal one side, she got her seri, she got intizam for iftar. Permission is given in i'tikaf. For necessity, if you have to go out, you can go. The laws can be learnt. One is a sunnah i'tikaf, where a man is now stuck. Even if he wants to go outside to talk to a friend, he say your i'tikaf will break. He becomes stuck. The amount of islah that takes place in that i'tikaf, only that man will understand who tastes it. But now because that is far, I will bring down to something shorter. In this last 10 days, if you can find 3 days, if you can find 3 days for i'tikaf, if you can find 24 hours for i'tikaf, and if even we are the laziest and of the laziest, and if we can't find any time, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what was his kindness? He started high, and he would always say, but for the weaker, for the weaker, for the weaker. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the person who makes i'tikaf in the masjid between Maghrib and Isha, not speaking to anyone, while being engaged in salah and recitation of Quran, Allah will build for him a place in Jannah. Allah will build for him a palace in Jannah. Now think now, may Allah put it in everyone's heart. If I'm not going to do it on every odd night, then let me say at least 3 odd nights. 3 odd nights I say to my wife, I'll make my iftar in the masjid. The masjid prepared a little, but I'll eat few bhajjas. After Taraweeh, I'm coming back home. After Maghrib, I won't come home. Because it's so quickly to come, make wuzu, fast and come back, time is up. You say, I only got half an hour. But in that half an hour, if I just sit in the front and I read Quran, and my Allah promised me one palace in Jannah. Remember, no one's house is going to be put in Jannah if the man is not coming into that house. Promise of dying with Iman is given. If you got a palace in Jannah, you getting to Jannah. To die with Iman in today's time is the thing we all worried about. Allah inspire us all. A few nights in the nights that are coming, if we can just spend a little time from Maghrib to Isha with the intention of i'tikaf. And if arrangements are made that some program can take place, for youngsters also i'tikaf in the masjid, 24 hours. For the elderly, 3 days i'tikaf. And to start it to move on to. Wallah, those people who started sitting for 10 days, a time has come that every year, few months before they send their names to the madrasa, that you got place for me, book my tent, I'm coming this year. Say last year, the year before, it became part of their life. To become someone in the masjid who loves to be in the masjid, that's called i'tikaf. But we learn it with these 10 days. We learn it with these 3 days. You create such a relationship, 2 things will happen after, on which we will end. One is, your heart will become attached to the masjid. But to get that attachment, we need to make i'tikaf. Any person whose heart becomes attached to the masjid, رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مَعَلَّقٌ بِالْمَسَاجِدِ, a man whose heart is attached to the masjid, he has been promised on the day of Qiyamah, when there will be no shade but the arsh of Almighty Allah, he will get place under that shade. So VIP treatment in the year after is for the man whose heart is attached to the masjid. The heart becomes attached to the masjid with i'tikaf. Number 2, when a person starts making i'tikaf, he learns how to enjoy the masjid. He doesn't become bored in the masjid. When he learns that, a time comes in his life where he becomes known as a peg of the masjid. Allah in His kindness one day make every one of us the pegs of the masjid. What is a peg of the masjid? People would say, whenever he had free time, I saw him going to the masjid. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily some people are pegs in the masjid. The angels are their companions. If these people ever happen to be absent from the masjid, then the angels will go looking for them. If they ever have to fall sick, the angels themselves will go to visit them. If they ever have any need, the angels will ask Almighty Allah, can we assist them? For me and you to become those pegs of the masjid. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever will perform i'tikaf for only 1 day, seeking the pleasure of Allah, Allah will open 3 trenches between him and the fire of Jahannam, the width of each being the distance between heaven and earth. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the reward for performing i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadhaan is equal to the reward of 2 Hajj and 2 Umrahs. And finally, Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, the one who makes i'tikaf, he has kept himself away from sin. So much of reward will be written for him, like the reward that is written for a person who has done every act of goodness. So much of reward will be written for him. كَعَامِلِ الْحَسَنَاتِ كُلِّهَا, like the reward written for a man who has done every act of virtue. What that man will get, this man will get. May Allah Tabarak Ta'ala inspire us all. It's not easy to leave the house. It's not easy to come away from our luxurious bed. But think of the man who the angel said, if I can't find my sheep here on your roof, you're not going to find your Allah on your bed. Sometimes we have to pull out. And the amount of islah that will take place for the man who comes to the masjid, it is that islah that I am looking for. We are all looking for. Allah Tabarak Ta'ala inspire us all. Connect our hearts to the masajid. Make a sunnah in our lives that every year, few days are for the masjid. This i'tikaf as a sunnah must become alive in the ummah again in a big manner. Every masjid must have a lot of i'tikaf taking place. Place for many people. It's not a 1-2 people show. I'tikaf is meant for everyone's car to get a service. May Allah Tabarak Ta'ala inspire us all. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.